Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the fourth of 5 Lunch and Learns of this program year with Women's Impact Fund. Today's event is Social Media and Teen Minds, a perfect match or a perfect storm. While I don't yet have teenagers of my own, I do worry about what the media and device world will look like when my small children are bigger. I wonder what questions like these mean for those children who do not have stable parental figures in their lives. And I imagine that many of you joining us today have similar questions. I am so grateful to have 3 women here today to help us think through these sensitive issues. So special thank you to Natalie, Grace, and Lisa for being with us. My name is Patricia Massey-Hoke, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Impact Fund. We are a giving circle that seeks to strengthen communities through maximizing women's leadership and philanthropy through collective giving, education, and engagement. We currently have around 450 members and welcome anyone who is interested in joining us. Just check out our website, womensimpactfund.org, to learn more about joining. It is my privilege to work with our members as they develop and lead us through events such as today's. Special thanks to the Lunch and Learn team of the Member Education Committee, led by Michelle Cottrell and Amanda Glowacki, who have been hard at work preparing for a strong series of events this year. I'm grateful as well to our community partners whose financial sponsorship supports the operations of Women's Impact Fund. They're listed here on the screen beside me. Finally, thank you to those members and friends of Women's Impact Fund who choose to make a gift to our annual fund, which supports critical operating needs of our organization. Before COVID, events such as the one that you are attending today would have required a $20 ticket purchase. However, given our desire to remain accessible, we are currently offering our programs free of charge. If you are able, I hope that you might consider visiting womensimpactfund.org/donate to make a contribution to the annual fund at an amount that is meaningful to you. And thank you. With that, I'm going to pass the program shortly to Rachel Miner. Rachel just joined Women's Impact Fund last August, so she is proof that you can jump right in to get involved. She's the founder of Thrive Benefits, which works with mid-market companies to help employers have long-term, sustainable, high-quality health benefits. Her passion for this work comes from having a son with health issues and becoming frustrated at the dysfunction of our healthcare system. Rachel is going to moderate today's panel discussion and will introduce our speakers, and she will oversee the audience Q&A toward the end. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go. With that, I will welcome Rachel.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm super excited to be here today. When we talked about the discussions of potential topics for this Lunch and Learn, this seemed to be a hot topic for many of our members to talk about, not only as it relates to teens, but as it relates to being an adult ourselves and how we compare ourselves through social media. So we found that this is a pretty relevant topic, especially with the isolation of COVID and the fact that kids have been more on their phones and whatnot. We just kind of wanted to get 3 experts' opinions on really what they see as trends in social media use and how it'll impact a young developing mind. So we're super, super excited that we have 3 rock star women who will be helping us with this panel. As Patricia had mentioned, if y'all have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, but we will not be answering them until the end. I also want to have a special note. Thank you to my counterpart, Stacey Neal, for helping to get the 3 speakers that we have. So our 3 speakers are Natalie Moore. She's the school psychology manager at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, School Psychological Services. She has a psychological associate's license and has worked in Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools since 1995. We have Dr. Lisa Pennington. She is a North Carolina doctoral level licensed psychologist at Carolina Mines. She has worked as a school psychologist for several years prior to transitioning into private practice. And then our third speaker is Grace Smith, who is the regional clinical director at CBT Counseling Centers and a NAMI Charlotte board member. With 18 years experience, she provides individuals and family therapy services to youth and adults who struggle with anxiety, depression, diminished self-esteem, mood instability, anger issues, relationship struggles, and those having difficulty adjusting to life's transitional events. So we have a deep breadth of knowledge on our panel that we're super excited about. I'm just going to ask some questions to our panelists, and we'll see what their opinion is on it. Again, if you have any questions, it'll be in the chat at the end. So, Miss Grace, the first question is going to be geared towards you. What do you think are, because it's not all doom and gloom, what are the positive impacts of social media or ways that it potentially enhances our children's lives or mental health?
Right. Well, thank you so much for that question, Rachel. Right now, there's so much that is said about social media. We've heard so much more about the negative impacts and how it really affects children and adolescents in the homes and the schools and even in their relationship with others. But then the positive parts of it are not really highlighted as much as I believe and many others believe they should be. One of those things is social media helps with positive inspiration. These networks create peer motivation. It inspires the youth to develop really healthy habits as well, trying something new, and they're hearing it from their own counterparts, which makes such a big difference because, a peer's family is their peeps, I mean, we are families and adults, we are there for them, but then they will first listen to what their counterparts say, and they're like, yeah, that's cool, because mom and dad and caregivers are old school and they're not cool at all, So that is one really good thing about it. The other part of it is it helps with forming those connections that are there. Now, we know even as adolescents and teenagers as well, being able to be in a place where they're accepted by others and they feel comfortable about it can sometimes be difficult, even face-to-face interactions with others. But there's something about this distant kind of close interactions where they can be able to just be free to be who they are. And what better way than just to click a button and the whole world of social life opens up to them. Even those who kind of either have that anxiety or are very uncomfortable around groups of people, that creates that connection in those platforms. The other one is to do with identity formation. Individuals, young people who express opinions on social media experience an increase of their own well-being. And that's what studies have shown. It also results in forming and expressing their opinions. I think to say where I became first aware of it, it tells you about my age, with like TikTok. First time I heard about TikTok, I was like, TikToking to who? It didn't make any sense at all. But then when I got a little bit more into it, thanks to my son, he's a young adult though, he's 27, maybe not young, but he introduced me to it, and I saw what that does right there. It helps that platform for them to just express what their thoughts are without someone saying, hey, shut up, you're thinking way too deep, and then just hearing it, and then they've got that way to just say, I don't think this is so cool, or what do you all think about this? And getting that feedback is really helpful for them. Then the other one that, of course, is near and dear to me as a psychotherapist is it even opens a way for therapy, online therapy. Stigma is not there. Their mom's car is not going to be seen parked at the therapist or psychologist's office. You know how teenagers are, like, are you okay? But this is a place where they can just kind of be free, and they know they can just log in from wherever they are, and it becomes even more so normalized for them. So those are some of the positive things that are there about social media. And of course, along with this goes to them developing those communication skills as they talk to peers and their age mates, and making friends, pursuing areas of interest as well. And of course, as I said before, sharing thoughts and ideas.
Great. Thank you, Grace.
Sure.
Lisa and Natalie, if you guys have anything you want to add to this, you certainly can, but just to be conscious of time, I'm going to move on to the next question. If you want to add something at the end, we always can. Perfect. Lisa, how robust are developing teen social skills, do you think, as a result of social media?
Unmuted. I will say that one, teens are definitely seem to be exposed to more at a younger age than they were when we were growing up. The other thing is the difficulty with social media and social skills development in children is that in the past, the way that we learn social skills is we get immediate feedback from our actions. So, for example, at a young age, if a child takes a toy from another child, the child starts crying and that child realizes, wait, I shouldn't do that. As a teenager, even making a negative comment to another child or student in the hall and saying, ooh, I don't like your haircut, or I don't like your clothes, that other student may give the feedback of being a little more sad around them or not wanting to interact with them. And so then they lose a friend and they figure out, I have to be nicer to that person. One of the downsides of social media and social development is kids, one, they can hide behind usernames so they don't feel like it's as personal. The other is there's not that immediate feedback from the individual, which can create more bullying kind of behavior and that type of thing. So I think there are so many positive things when I think about during COVID, where would we have been in education if we didn't have Zoom and Google Meetup and all of those things? But at the same time, other than using devices for those means and for education, the research on social media and teens and screen time shows that the average adult uses screen time about 4 hours a day outside of what they normally would do for work, and the average teen 6 hours. So I think in general, if you think about a day is full of whatever your extracurricular activity and that's your socialization time, it does stifle kids' development in that area. The final thing that I think is really difficult with kids and screen time is when I was growing up, if some of my friends went to the mall, I didn't know about it. Now everyone sees, oh, I wasn't invited, or so-and-so took their friend on this trip and I didn't get to go, or they were all at someone's house and spent the night and I wasn't included. So I think positively, it gives kids connections that are a little more shy and can connect through social media and feel like they're part of a group. But the downside of it is they can still feel alone, even though they have a lot of friends. So we just kind of have to figure out the balance on that.
So Lisa, I have a follow-up question to that. Do you think that their friendships nowadays, because they have access to more information, like, hey, Lisa and Natalie went to the store and they didn't invite me, do you think that the relationships tend to lend themselves to more drama or maybe being a little bit more cruel?
I think so. I mean, even just the kids that I see in my office, there was a recent research study with therapists, and they talked about the fact that students or children or adolescents can come in your office and tell you about an entire conversation with another student that led to their frustration or being really sad about things or feeling like they didn't have a lot of friends. And then therapists find out like this whole conversation occurred through text messaging. So I think in general, having information, and I'm sure everyone has experienced this as an adult, you may send a text that you thought was kind of funny, but it was taken out of context because there's no affect and the visual that goes with it. We are creatures of nonverbal cues. Like we need those nonverbal cues to function. And that's why kids that are on like an autism spectrum have a hard time with social connection, because they don't read a lot of those nonverbal cues. So that's what we do. We take ourselves away from that gift we have of reading nonverbal cues and place it into screens. So I think it does lead to a lot of drama. I think it's important, and we'll get to this later, but to really educate kids about what we say and how we say it through the means of social media or text messaging.
Yeah.
So.
Miss Natalie, how can we navigate cyberbullying now that bullies have access to kids 24/7?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because cyberbullying often occurs while children or adolescents are at home. So we really need to have our parents or guardians or the mentors in our life make sure that we are monitoring their internet usage. And you're going to, for any questions I have, you're going to hear communication is key. Communicating with your students, being a presence in their life. Keep home computers easily accessible. Like, it shouldn't be this secret hideaway thing. We need to be open with the channels that we're using. Talk regularly with your children about their online activities and internet etiquette. We need to teach some of those things, very similar to what we've already been talking about in terms of we don't know tone, we don't know the emotion that comes with what the intent was. Talk specifically about cyberbullying and encourage your children to notify you or a trusted adult immediately if something happens to them, so that it doesn't have to be ongoing. Tell children that you yourself may review their online communication, like be open about that too. Monitor chats, look at that stuff. I certainly am a proponent of privacy of our students and our children, but I also know that their decision-making and their impulse control still has some development that needs to happen. And we need to be the guiders of that and teaching them some healthy boundaries and again, that social etiquette. So monitor that. They shouldn't have password protected items that you don't have the password to. So if they have password type things, great, but you should have that access. Emphasize expectations for responsible online behavior, make clear consequences of violations. We really need to let kids know that they're typing words can have serious consequences, that it's not just that verbal word anymore. And then you can even maybe make some fun of it and consider having a parent-child internet contract where you guys kind of lay out the guidelines. If they are on social media or things like that, lay out some ground rules as a family of what that looks like. Beware of warning signs that might indicate your child's being bullied, like if they start withdrawing, if there's a reluctance to start looking at their computer, or if they're really starting to hide their computer from you. Talk about that openly and try to get. You can also install parental controls for filtering software and things like that. And Internet Safety 101 has a lot of guidance and stuff like that for parents. I'll stop there.
I'll have some more follow-up questions for you in a little bit regarding that. So I was at an appointment earlier this morning, the dermatologist, and it was really funny because I was talking to the nurse practitioner about how when I was 12 years old, I told her what we were doing today. When I was 12, 13 years old, I was wearing butterfly clips in my hair and overalls, and I thought I was hot as heck. But clearly the teens nowadays are wearing, midriffs, they're dressing like they're adults, which some people can equate to them having a lot of self-confidence. But Grace, my question for you is, do you think that these teens are truly self-confident, or are they kind of just giving in to the peer pressure around them?
Sorry, I was still muted. Didn't realize that. Well, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that we've got to really bear in mind is who is determining that that way of dressing is per se dressing very adult-like. Because, you know, we have to first and foremost acknowledge that times seem to be a little bit different. But then in terms of like exposure, what does that look like? You know, when you talk about midriffs, you know, I think of dressing up. I mean, I went to schools that any skirt above the knee was, oh my gosh, you know, that is harlot-like behavior, you know, just go back home and change or something like that. But then it's so different right now, and it's even grasping what that means. And when it comes to like when self-confidence with teenagers, there's so many things that are kind of tied right into that. And one, we've got to recognize that teenagers are confronted with so many tough issues, and that they have got to learn how to deal with them to test what their confidence is going to be like, and really grow it and ground it for them to become formidable adults in the community and for themselves. And these tough issues range from dealing with issues with their physical appearance to being accepted into friendship groups as well. It's reflected on how they behave in public, how they perform in school, in other areas of their lives, whether it's at home with family or in the community. And of course, families, even family expectations. And not just their nuclear family. Let's think about extended family. You know, Grace's grandma will still look at me like, why would you dress like that? And I'm wearing pants, you know, because back in the day, women pants, men's wear, you know, it's very different. It's all there, that's there. And by becoming more aware of themselves, teenagers becoming more aware of themselves, they become better equipped to deal with those hurtful things that may endanger their self-confidence. So what that would look like, for example, is like, why is it so important for teenagers to have that self-confidence? One of those is the belief that they'll be successful in any situation, or if they're given any task when they are self-confident. That self-confidence is related to their self-esteem, which makes them feel good about themselves, which outwardly then makes them feel good about what they're doing. And then internally they feel, well, you know, I'm a worthwhile person after all. You know, I'm hot and then another piece of cake. You know, they feel good about themselves when they have that. And they can walk with their head up because they know that I am not just anything. I've got something to contribute to the world. And it makes me feel wonderful doing it as well. And then self-confidence can vary throughout life as we know it. And particularly as we know with adolescents, it is really, I think it's their oxygen and the food that they eat. That confidence is what builds them up. And when that is lacking at that age, it's very hard to now climb up that hill to the top of being able to be confident in who and what they believe as well. So positive confidence, what does that look like? You know, it's not just about how they walk. It is how they communicate with others, how they receive and accept praise. It will be how they're open to criticism and feedback from others. It will be how they show curiosity to new ideas as well, and refusing to get upset, you know, out of hand, upset when things don't go the way that they originally planned. All those are some of those things to do with that. I know I could go on and on, but for the sake of time, I will chill out. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace.
Sure.
Natalie, earlier you mentioned that teens are entitled to privacy to some degree. That being said, do you think that they're trustworthy?
Yeah, so my honest answer is yes, our teens are trustworthy. But we earn that trust, right? So we develop that trust, we grow with them. And I think in an earlier discussion, we talked about our teens less trustworthy than we have been in the past. And my gut reaction was, quite honestly, no, we may have more access to information than we ever have before, but I don't think teens are less trustworthy than we were when we were growing up. But I actually tried to research it. to see if there was any research to support my gut reaction. And I really couldn't find any research to support that teens are less trustworthy. I did want to highlight this quote I came across was from Lawrence Steinberg, who's a prominent developmental psychologist, but he talked about how teenagers are one of the most negatively stereotyped groups in America. And yet, as a society, we need and we should value their developmental gifts. So we need to kind of reframe some of our teens and looking at them as creative and energetic and their idealism to recreate the world and recreate the future. So in looking at trustworthy stuff and building that trust, our research talks about how our teens need to also have the ability to trust others. And that is a two-way street. And much of the research on trust really leads to respect and developing that respectful notion. Teens often shut down when they're feeling like their autonomy is being taken away from them. And so we have to really shift from how much respect we feel like we're getting to whether or not we're also showing respect for them, right? We have to model the behaviors that we want from our kids, and respect for their autonomy is key. So it's again balancing that with giving them some tools to be able to make healthy decisions, and giving them some privacy, but having this kind of a step ladder of growing that. Like we give them some responsibility and see if they can earn our trust, and then we give them more responsibility, and then we give them more responsibility. We give them respect, see if they're respectful to us. I hope that's making sense. Communication is definitely key in all of this. As we're talking with our teens, take a moment to calm our internal reaction and refrain from, they're not threatening my authority, but maybe they are trying to give me some cues that they're ready for some more responsibility, or they're trying to grow their wings in a mature way. And make sure that we're having ways to be present and listening in the conversation with them. Because, oftentimes we are already getting ready our response to them, instead of truly being in the moment and listening to what they're telling us. And so then we get into this back and forth, I'm already responding. So model that. I'm going to take a pause right now, and I actually need some time to think about this, because I do feel like maybe some trust has been broken, and we're going to have to circle back and talk about this. So anyway.
Those are definitely relevant points I think of in my own life. If I'm telling my daughter that she shouldn't be on her phone as much, I can't be on my phone as much. And so it's a two-way street where I'm like, I can't ask something that I'm not willing to do myself. If I'm glued to my email, I am setting the example of what she should be doing as well. So I like the fact that you highlighted that too, is that in order to get the respect, we have to give the respect and model the appropriate behavior.
Yeah, and for some of us, that's a huge shift in a paradigm, right? I mean, that old adage of because I said so, or do as I say, not as I do. For some of us who were raised that way, we want to be able to go back to that, right? Like when my father gave me a look, he only had to look at me. There was no discussion about that. But I challenge us to reframe being afraid of that paradigm shift, because from that comes our kids should question. We need to move boundaries and not just do things because the authority says so. We're coming out of a time where we are really trying to push back on oppression or trying to have those respectful conversations. And so we should teach our kids to be able to have respectful conversations of why. I just want to understand why these rules are there, or why these procedures and practices in there. And so instead of putting up that defensive posturing, just giving them a safe space to be able to challenge that. And then we can talk to them about their tone and behavior and how they approached the authority and respect. So anyway, just a shift in that paradigm.
Yeah. We have 2 more questions, and just as a time check, we've got about 8 minutes until we're doing some Q&A. And we already do have some questions in the chat. So if anybody else has any questions, make sure you put it in the chat, because that's where we'll be taking the questions from. Lisa, in our last meeting when we were doing a prep call for this, we were talking about a study regarding 8-year-old children. And it was suggested that universally all kids around 8 years old should be screened for anxiety, which I found very interesting. I have a 7 and a 9-year-old. My 9-year-old does suffer from anxiety, but he's got a lot of health issues. So that's kind of how we explain it. But there's a lot of pressure on kids nowadays for perfectionism, to be doing multiple activities for many different reasons. From that study of talking about how kids at just 8 years old should be screened for anxiety, what kind of takeaways do you think that we can have from this and make it applicable to teenagers and the way they may have anxiety?
So when I saw that question, I kind of went back and did a little research, because I was thinking, I think they are screened that early by pediatricians. So us healthcare providers, we may be a little sneaky in that. Like it's not a new phenomena. Pediatricians for years have been screening for different symptoms and things with kids. They actually give what's called a pediatric symptom checklist, and they screen, and they have items related to anxiety within that checklist starting at age 7. So I think it's actually a very good move, and something that I think goes overlooked. I will say that since COVID and the pandemic, across the board, people are seeing way more anxiety in children, even at a younger age than age 7. I see kids that are wired for worry, is what I call it, my own term. So they just, even at age 4 and 5 and 6, they're just the little warriors. And what's so important to know about anxiety is that the earlier kids learn good coping skills, that actually changes the mechanisms in their brains and how they respond to anxiety. I had a boy that I worked with for years. He started seeing me at like age 7 and 8. And then I didn't see him for a long time, but his parents brought him back in because there was a big crisis with one of his friends. And I said, well, how did he handle it? And they said, well, he went out and mowed the lawn for our entire neighborhood because he had learned from an early age, you've got to get your brain busy. You can't just sit around and think about it. You got to get moving. And so he just went from yard to yard to yard and was mowing grass all throughout the neighborhood. And then that was his response to the anxiety. So I think it's a great question. It's a very good point in that I don't think there is an age that's too early to screen for anxiety and to provide kids the coping skills that they need.
Mine is cleaning and laundry. As I'm sure many women have the same
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Last question before we get to our Q&A. Natalie, we're going to circle back to you. A lot of people are very fearful to upset their kids or feel like they're betraying their trust, or they just personally feel awkward in having conversations with their kids regarding pornography, sexting, sexual predators. So do you have any specific tips regarding A, having those conversations that are not super fun to have, and B, just ways that parents can monitor social media, or should they be monitoring it?
Yes, thanks. So the truth of the matter is that the internet has opened up this kind of unfiltered world for us. And while these are awkward conversations to have, and they're hard conversations to have, and never did we think we'd have to be having them, we do have to have conversations around this, because whether or not our children go looking for things on the internet, things pop up. You all know that when you search something that you think is fairly benign, it's quite possible that a pop-up would come up or a visual image may come up that you weren't necessarily looking for. So again, communication is key in protecting our kids from online exploitation. So I'm going to talk about some preventative things first and very briefly, and then talk about some questions that we can ask. We do need to supervise their online activities at all ages, but again, at our younger ages in particular, limit access to sites that can facilitate online interactions. We really have to watch chats and online activities up to and including gaming. So just be very aware when our kids are playing these online games that there's not always protections of whose the chat is. And while the kid may think that he's playing with other 8-year-olds, we don't know that. We don't know. And so that could open up some guidelines. So we need to watch that. If they have access, definitely discuss internet safety, monitor their internet use. Also understand that children are naturally curious. So if they start asking, try to not have a really anxious discussion, kind of pause, calm yourself, and just see where that's going. Realize that kids do need and want our guidance. Educate your child about healthy sexuality, respect for themselves, respect for others. Keep the lines of communication open by listening to what your kids say is happening. Ask some questions. Have you ever seen something online that made you uncomfortable or curious? Like, you can just start by throwing out a question. Have you ever seen anything that made you uncomfortable or curious? Have you accidentally seen any pictures online that were either sexual in nature or had the human body in naked form? How did that happen? What did you do? And how did that make you feel? Have any of your friends accessed pornography, either accidentally or intentionally? And these conversations can come up naturally when you're on walks, or as you're kind of having dinner discussions, or as you're in the car, they're trapped with your attention. So it doesn't have to feel like you're investigating, reporting, and they're under the light, but have those open lines of communication so that they know that they can come to you. Also, let them know that sometimes our online predators use fear tactics. And so if they did send a picture inadvertently, sometimes they'll use that to say, I'm going to tell your parents, or I'm going to tell your sister. Talk to them about that. Like, there is nothing you can't say to me that we can't problem solve. So if somebody's telling you that, that's wrong. That's blackmail, and talk to them about those things. The lines of communication really need to be open. And I'll stop there because I know we have some Q&A, but I hope that gave some guidance. And it is awkward. Nobody likes to have them. I know that for me, I used books and novel stories a lot of time, where we would read the text simultaneously. And then in those teen years, if my daughter was reading a novel, I would read that novel, and we could have some discussions about teen suicide that way. When somebody's pressuring you to have relationships that you're not ready to have, literature can give us a springboard to have some of those conversations.
Okay, so we have several questions, and we have about 15 minutes to go through these. So for our panelists, if you guys can take maybe a minute and a half on each of these. Lisa, we joked around before that if somebody gets long-winded, I'm going to go like this. So in the spirit of what you were just saying, Natalie, and this can go to any of our panelists, but because you've been so strongly talking about privacy, our first question is, how do you balance a child's desire for privacy with checking their accounts and texts? I would have been mortified having my mom listen to my phone conversations at their age. So how do we tell them it's okay for us to do?
And certainly Dr. Pennington or Ms. Smith, please jump in. I don't want to monopolize that question, and we may have different opinions about it as well. I'm not suggesting that we monitor every communication that comes into our kiddos, right? Like, again, if they have a cell phone, I am assuming that they gave you some indicators that they are trustworthy enough to have a device to begin with, because again, that should be earned. Their level of access should be earned by behaviors they have demonstrated that they're trustworthy. So I'm not suggesting every text you're going to monitor, every phone conversation. One, that's impossible. We can't monitor them 24/7. What I would suggest, though, is that you say to them periodically, I'm going to be taking your phone and I'm going to scroll through things and I'm going to read things and I'm going to look at comments and I'm going to read that. And if they are, so sometimes, again, mortified, but sometimes what I've said to the kids that I've been working with is, this something that you would have said in front of your grandma? Particularly when we're talking about hurtful things. Would you have said that in front of your grandma? Then don't put it in writing. Because it can be taken out of context. So really having those, so it is a balance, I get that, but they do have to have an awareness that I'm going to be checking this because of safety reasons and because I just want to check in with you. And the more trust they earn from you, the less you monitor, but don't ever stop monitoring. Like, again, their decision making, they're impulsive creatures, they're learning, their brain is developing, they need guidance, or they wouldn't need parents to begin with. We could just let them go and be responsible. We have to grow them to a certain point. And I think my minute's probably up.
Lisa, do you consider online gaming an anxiety calming or like a keep your brain busy activity? Or do you think it induces anxiety?
I think it depends. There's such a wide range of what online gaming can be. And you can have even something as simple as Roblox or Minecraft or first-person shooter games. And I think that in general, even with kind of the monitoring of the devices, I'm going to go back to that real quick, is that I think that your child should know, their password. And just the fact that you know their password can limit some of the things that they do, even like having them, like in my family, until they were old enough to drive, everyone had to take and put their phone in the kitchen to charge it at night. When you're old enough to drive and you have to wake yourself up and you need your alarm, you've kind of grown to a whole new level. But having that device in a family area is helpful as well. Same thing with gaming. Like, you have to know your child. What I tell parents is, if you have a child that can go on a game and 30 minutes in, you ask them to get off. And when they get off, there's the full blown explosion and anger and frustration. That child needs more limit setting on that device. So I think that you can't really say one versus the other. I do believe that keeping your mind busy when you're anxious is helpful, but I don't think that being anxious and then playing Call of Duty is actually relaxing to the mind. I think that may agitate it. So in general, I say know your child, know their limits. Also, and going back to the point, and since we're talking about gaming, is in those online chats within the games, I think it's really important to know as a parent that kids you can put safety limits on there where they're only speaking to people that they've invited in and that they know and that are friends. Because if it's open, they can be on there. And if you ever have been able to listen to the things that are going on, most of the times parents can't because they're on headsets. But there's a lot of language occurring. And if you have a 7-year-old on there playing with, could be 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, even teens, it's just inappropriate. So I think that teaching kids to redirect their thoughts for anxiety is one thing, but understanding what really is relaxing is another. And so you just have to really set limits and know your child in those situations. So
you answered it
quick enough.
Grace, this next question is going to be geared towards you. From talking with friends and who have teenagers, it feels like kids actually have less independence. And I'm surprised by how much these parents now are in contact with and know exactly what their children are doing at all times. If this is accurate, how do these kids learn to be independent and have some freedom?
I'll put it this way, and forgive me because I am going to use my poor son as an example. As a single parent raising him, there was always the battle of, you don't trust me, mom. You behave like, he's a child brought up. I'm from African descent. So when things never worked out his way, he said, Mom, we are in America. You need to do what Americans do. Because I have the way that I was brought up that was very, very strict. And it was all part of saying, I want to let you do what you've got to do, but you've got to make me feel like I'm comfortable with letting you do it. So you need to give me a little piece of it. Show me that you can. Be open about certain things. But if you're not honest with me, or you're giving me a half truth, then it's so hard to do that. But then you've also got to let go of that leash a little bit, for lack of a better term. And one example I can think of is, when there were certain consequences that would be there, for example, of things that he was not supposed to do, so I would take or refrain him from doing certain things. Now, I could be that parent who said, you will never, ever, ever go for another date with anyone ever again until you're an adult, because he made me upset. But that was all about my emotion. But how am I teaching that teenager? How am I teaching him? How am I showing him what it is? I think a mistake that we make sometimes as parents and caregivers or teachers or what have you is, we've got to remember that when we are saying don't, we need to tell them what the do looks like. Mm-hmm. We cannot say, all right, I give this example of, you've got a pot of a plant, you had this plant, it did so well, and then its life was over, right? So you take this pot and you put it on the patio, and you've emptied out all the dirt that was in there, but it sits there on the patio, the balcony for a long time. Now, when you don't do anything, you've taken all that gunk out, but it's sitting there empty for years or months. What ends up happening after a while, it starts becoming the home of critters. You've got spiders and all that in there. So, hey, when you're leaving it in there, you have removed all the yucky stuff, but you've not put anything to replenish. So when we're saying we don't trust you, that's not enough. It's an incomplete statement to say, we don't trust you doing this, but to show trust, this is what it will look like. And when we are doing that, we are actually enforcing that part of that independence, because we forget, just as Natalie had said before, we just say, well, why can't I do this, Mom? Because I said so, and that's it. That's not enough, because there are those questions of why. Give them the why, because the purpose is to teach. We don't just leave it hanging and say, no, my mom just said no, why? Like, that doesn't do anything. So to be able to do that, we've got to teach them what that looks like, but they've got to show us that they can be able to do it. So, yeah. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's the best I've got right now.
I think you did a fine job. Natalie, and one of the questions that we got is regarding specific questions around a 6-year-old, and if we can have any recommendations for somebody who just dealt with a loss. If you guys can check the chat and reach out directly regarding that, I think Lisa, Grace, Natalie, you may have some resources for it, but it might be better explained over private chat or whatnot. But Natalie, is CMS running initiatives around this or other mental health challenges through the school system right now?
Yeah, so clearly we have to, well, I would love to be able to say reading, writing, and arithmetic are what the Educational Institute has to do. We all know that for reading, writing, and arithmetic to take place, we have to remove barriers to access to reading, writing, and arithmetic. And what that falls into is the social emotional health of our children, right? So of course, we have to look at this as a whole child, and we absolutely have initiatives in place that I'm actually really proud of to address mental health. We do as a district finally have for the last 2 years an adoptive curriculum for social emotional learning K-12. In our K-8 schools, it's the Caring School Community, and it empowers teachers to have safe conversations and build relationships with their kids and give some curriculum around that. At our high schools, just this year, we adopted 7 mindsets. And again, it gives that safe space and a curriculum for teachers to start having this. Is every school implementing with fidelity? No, because we're in the middle of coming out of a pandemic as well, right? So we're taking that initiative and really moving it forward within the confines of our building. The other thing that I'm really proud of is that we are expanding our social emotional support providers. Each year, our board has graciously allowed us to hire more counselors, social workers, and psychologists, because it's going to take all support services to be able to help the whole child and to be able to remove those barriers. So I'm really proud of that. This is the second year that we also have a panorama screening. So in terms of screening, it's not an anxiety screener or a depression screener, but it is a screener of kids giving feedback of how they feel about their emotional regulation, how they feel about their adult relationships, how they feel about their engagement in school. And then school teams actually look at that data to provide initiatives around that to support the students in their building. So our data at our building says our kids are not feeling engaged. What are we going to do as a school to get them to be more engaged? And I think through adopting that safe space for students to talk, these questions come up so that we can talk about respectful boundaries, internet cyberbullying, and so on and so forth. And then the last thing I'll say, just as an initiative that I'm also very proud of, is that in our high schools, 11 of our high schools, our 9th grade students in their health curriculum this year got QPR, which is the emotional stuff for suicide. How do I, as a teenager, if my friend comes and talks to me about suicidal ideation, how do I respond? It's like CPR when there's a medical emergency. QPR is the emergency for emotional well-being. Question, persuade, and refer. Because our teens shouldn't shoulder this responsibility of, but they do need tools to be able to tell their friend, I'm actually going to take you right now and we're going to go talk to so-and-so because we need to get you some help because I care about you and I want you to be alive. So.
That's amazing. I did not know about that. So that's very cool. 2 last questions, and if we can address them really, really quickly. The first one's going to go to you, Lisa. Beyond literature, any shows or movies that you think are appropriate for teens to highlight impacts of social media danger?
Oh, wait, can you repeat that? I was thinking of the last question. Go ahead.
You're all good. Beyond literature, what shows, movies are appropriate for teens to highlight the impacts of social media dangers?
Well, I will tell you, someone maybe have to help me out here, but there is a great documentary on Netflix about like the person from Facebook that came out and talked about the algorithms and how they affect. Yes, I think that's excellent. Yeah. I think if anything that I got from that I hope that other teens would get, is that everyone that spoke on that documentary that was from the higher levels of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, different areas, they do not allow their own children to have access to it. And they know how dangerous it is. The other thing that I think was fascinating about it was that, us psychologists, counselors, we have had research. There are hundreds and hundreds of articles about the negativity and the side effects of social media, even screens, even before 2007 iPhone existed, even just TV alone, and the effects and the media and things have on children. But suddenly when someone from Facebook says it, it's like, wow, who knew? Well, we've all known. But I think that it does use that platform of things that people are familiar with. I can't think of other things that are more positively oriented, sadly, because there's so many things that I can tell you that kids shouldn't watch that I can't think of another one. But I totally agree about just having those conversations. And I think if they were to watch that documentary, I think it is extremely helpful, because there was a research study done that shows why children prior to age 13 are actually not even supposed to be allowed to have access to Instagram, Snapchat, all those things. That's why if you sign kids up for that early or they get on early, they have to put in a false birth date. And the reason is they have no concept what it even means to have an algorithm that's tracking your information. In fact, kids that are younger think that it's actually cool, like that they're a celebrity. Oh, they're tracking me. And why wouldn't I want them to track me and target me for different things? So I think in general, having those conversations and seeing the reality of they're using you and this stuff may not be accurate and they're just wanting to feed you with information to keep you using it is very eye-opening to children.
Great. Grace, this last question is for you, and knowing your background and dealing with trauma and maybe some cases that are a little bit more difficult, I'm gonna read the question as is, but I'm gonna tweak it just a tiny bit. The question is, I'm curious about how we think about these issues for young people who have less stable parental figures in their lives. How can we as a community help those children to respond? But then my second part to that question is, there's a lot of kids who have two households, divorced parents. So when you have one household that has a certain feeling regarding social media and usage of devices, and then you have another household that has a totally different standard for what they believe is appropriate, how do we make all of this work for kids? So it's really two questions, but we'll go to the first one first. If people don't have stable parental figures in their lives, how can we as a community help these kids?
I think it goes back to what we hear and what we know as, it takes a village. We wouldn't have, those kids, children and teens or youth out there, they may not have what it takes to have that perfect look of the family, as it may be said, but then all the other adults who are connected with them in any other way are going to be the ones who are going to help foster what that looks like. Because it's not about learning from someone who is a blood relation to you or someone who is related to you by marriage, but it is those positive interactions that youth or that child has with a mentoring and positive adult figure. And it doesn't matter where they're going to have that adult figure come from. It could be through their athletic team, their coach or whatever. It could be their teachers. It could be some of the community centers they're a part of. It could be other family members who are part of it. It could even be neighbors. But then it's all about what can we do to kind of put that in there. And then a place that we know that is a very good beginning is actually, I want to say, is the schools, because all kids go to school. They may not be part of any, sports stuff and extracurricular activities, but they all wind up in school. So what can the school systems do to kind of help enrich those kids and provide that for them? Even if it is in form of clubs or after school activities that are fun, please, not like after school activity where let's sit down and finish our homework, because I know I wouldn't stay any minute longer after the bell goes off at the end of the day to hang out, unless it's something fun. So what does that look like? And being creative with that. And you brought up the other question when it comes to, with trauma or living in different households. When it comes to that, more than anything, that responsibility is going to be, again, on the adults. Collaborative parenting, working together to be a united front, not united front as in an, like going to war, it's we, the parents, are against you, the kids, but then you're all on the same page. How do you communicate with each other? So if one household has got a certain rules or expectations, make sure that it is mirrored in the other household, or at least come to a compromise so that they're not night and day and causing all that confusion. And that the youth are seeing that, yeah, we may be in different households, but the expectations are the same. So we can't kind of sidetrack mom and say, dad said we can't. I learned that from my son did something like that. And I told him, honey, let me tell you, he didn't know what to expect. We did a 3-way with his dad. And I told him, so you told your dad that he can buy you this game? And we can't, what's it called? Like car theft, auto theft, that game. I was livid, but then he knew how to do it. But how do you work together? How do the parents work together? I think that's important more than anything else. That's it for me.
Great, thank you, Grace. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to Rachel for moderating and Stacy for helping plan, and to Natalie, Lisa, and Grace for your time shared with us today. We're really grateful. This was so informative. I cannot believe we've only been listening for an hour because I feel like we have gone over so much. So really, thank you very much for your time. And thanks to all of you for coming today. We are right at 1 o'clock. So we will close. I will invite our speakers to stay on for a few extra minutes. If you've got a quick question for them, feel free to stay on and we'll answer them. I would be remiss not to highlight continued upcoming events for Women's Impact Fund, namely our annual meeting, which is on Monday, May the 9th. Anybody can come, members and guests. It's free of charge. It's in person near Uptown. Check it out on our website. It's really a capstone of our whole year, and we give away our award, our most recent grantees. We do have another Lunch and Learn also coming up later in June. It's going to be focused on the environment, and more details are going to come out about that soon on our website. And we've got member socials and all kinds of things. So please check that out if you're interested in learning more about Women's Impact Fund or our events. And with that, I will say thank you again to all of our speakers and to the Lunch and Learn Committee for planning such a great event. And with that, we'll close. And again, just stick around online for anybody else who wants to join. But I hope that you guys have a great afternoon.